Good afternoon. Sorry for my tardiness. And the other members will be joining us shortly on the Assembly Budget Subcommittee number 5, Public Safety. So we're going, I heard reverb. I've never heard my voice like that before. So we're going to skip the vote-only items and go directly to recidivism efforts. Issue number 1, the Los Angeles City Attorney, the Community Justice Initiative. And I would like to have the current Los Angeles City Attorney and former Assembly member, Mike Feuer, Department of Finance, the LAO's office, come up front. And I believe you were a former member of this committee, so you probably know how well it runs or not run better than anybody else.
It seems like it's running much better now than then. Is that the right thing to say, Mr. Chair?
That's the right thing to say.
Yeah, okay, very good.
The issue before the subcommittee is of the Los Angeles City Community Justice Initiative, or as I like to say, the Los Angeles City Attorney Community Justice Reinvestment Initiative. But I don't want to change your title. I don't want to change it. But this is great for me because I've been talking about a holistic approach to recidivism. I was just starting to pick up some momentum, especially in the governor's office, that we can't look at things in silos anymore. So when I first read this, I was extremely excited about it, and so I'm glad you're able to make that long drive from Los Angeles up here in your electric car to
exactly right.
And testify.
I should say, Mr. Chair, I will insert any vocabulary you would like into the title of this initiative. I was actually thinking of calling it the Reginald Jones Sawyer initiative, but I thought that was a little too obvious for the committee. So what I'd like to do is just set the stage by describing what I think is common knowledge to members of this committee, but just to be clear about it here. There is a role for the traditional incarceration-based criminal justice system in our society. But that role cannot be the exclusive way we grapple with crime. We know that system consumes enormous resources, from law enforcement to the court system to incarceration. We know that system frequently fails. We know the rates of recidivism are extraordinarily high. We know that the costs associated with that system are sapping energy from other elements of our budget that we consider important. And it's an unsustainable model. And so I really honor the fact that this committee, and I know, Mr. Chair, you and Mr. Amiano are involved in another sort of a traveling committee around the state to talk more about these issues. I really honor the fact that this committee is looking to new, smarter ways to improve a justice system that simply cannot continue as it is if we want to get the right results. And the right results lead with we want public safety, and public safety is inconsistent with the rates of recidivism that we have currently, and the way we spend our money can be much smarter. So I think that we need a model, and I'm optimistic that the committee will agree that the approach we're proposing reflects that model, that is targeted to reducing recidivism and breaking the cycle, not just of crime, but of violence. A system that reduces reliance on a very overwhelmed court system, that reduces reliance on an incarceration system for which there is more demand than there is space, and perhaps most importantly, offers tangible ways in which the intervention of the justice system can change people's lives, can change lives in communities. So he said there's a real value to the intervention of the justice system as opposed to the appearance of value in a conviction rate that doesn't mirror the problem solving that everybody wants. So what I want to do is talk in just brief terms about what we have in mind here from my office. Now, the city attorney in Los Angeles prosecutes misdemeanors. But it should be very clear to this committee that the lion's share of the crimes we prosecute were first filed as felonies and ultimately were allocated to us as misdemeanors. The offenses are often very important, and they have a huge impact on quality of life in communities. They also are offenses that are going to escalate if they're not dealt with in a constructive way when we get them. And that's a theme that you'll see pervading our presentation. I would like to see us embark on this integrated, I think very innovative, neighborhood-based restorative justice model. And by that I mean a model that is geared toward restoring to the communities that which they've lost through the crimes that have been committed, and offering a likely way to break that cycle that I described earlier so that recidivism is unlikely to occur. So there are multiple elements to what we have in mind. A neighborhood court program, which involves members of the community, and that's a key theme also for what we're proposing, in determining the kinds of restorative acts, the repairing that the offender can do to make good for what he or she has committed, and aligning that person with intervention, the kinds of services necessary to reduce the likelihood that person is going to repeat the offense. A truancy prevention program, at the heart of which would be a new truancy prevention-related court system that relies on families, teens and families, to help identify for the offender those likely pathways that are going to reduce recidivism from their peers' standpoints, and divert, again, what otherwise would be resources that would be devoted to the justice system. A neighborhood school safety program. I don't have jurisdiction over safety on school sites, but we do have jurisdiction over safety in the neighborhoods in which schools are located. And kids ought to have safe passages to their schools. The crimes that happen in and around school sites have effects that far transcend the intrinsic value of that crime to that person, because they send a message in the community about whether it's safe to go to school at all. And we know from the truancy standpoint, the school safety standpoint, I know our chair is aware from his work as a city official in Los Angeles, if you don't tackle these issues now, these individuals are going to become uneducated people who are likely to be themselves implicated in the justice system later on in a way that's negative for all of us. We want to focus on, in this program, on homeless people and on veterans, many of whom are homeless as well. We have programs that can bring to a veteran, to a homeless person, often they're the same person, the ability to expunge from their records minor violations that will impede them from getting a job, from getting housing, from getting basic services. Programs that will allow them to get in touch with service providers who are going to give them the tools they need for anything from education to psychological counseling, so that they are no longer going to be a drain on society, but get the honor that they deserve. People who served our country shouldn't be on the street. We can do better. We have programs designed to prevent that from happening. A gun violence prevention program is part of this as well, because, you know, it's an extraordinary thing. You know, the science tells us, it's told for a long time, that if you are a recipient witness of an act of violence, you are much more likely to perpetrate it. We all know that. But the new science says that kids' brains develop in different ways if they are in neighborhoods pervaded with gun violence, with gang activity, and they can never get those neurological connections back to where they would have been but for being relegated to a neighborhood in which crime is pervasive. How unfair is that? To relegate an entire cohort of kids never to fulfill their biological potential. So we're focused on that issue, on gang issues and on gun issues in neighborhoods, identifying the community's top priorities, using suppression when it's necessary, but complementing that with important interventions for gang members, for example, so that if they choose the right pathway, they have incentives to get out of gang activity, and to wrap around services in a community. So instead of having a community that has broken lights and trees that aren't trimmed that provide harbor for people who are going to do dangerous activities, nuisances that occur, alcohol sales to underage kids and so forth, we have a pilot project. We want to build on that project where we can incorporate all those services and combine them with gang injunctions, so you have the suppression side balanced with the community restoration side. Prostitution diversion. Neighborhood prosecutors. So we have members of our team in neighborhoods soliciting from leaders in neighborhood councils and homeowners groups and educators and others, what are your most important needs for these offenses that if we nip in the bud now, we can prevent escalating crime and recidivism later on? I've chosen simply to highlight in a couple sentences each of a number of programs that I know the committee has a chance to review. We have an opportunity here, Mr. Chair, colleagues, and I think it's really important for us to identify the most important word here, and that's investment. I'm asking that the state give very serious consideration to investing in what this comprehensive system would look like, And then if it serves to be the model that I think it can be, because it should be, and there should be metrics and there should be an evaluation included in this can be a template for how we deal with a key facet of the justice system in ways that relate directly to the reduction of recidivism and the diversion of folks from the system that can't handle it now. There can be a model for the whole state. So I hope that's clear. I urge support for this. We're talking about a program which annually would only be about $9 million a year, and ideally we can get an infusion that enables us to travel for a 3-year period of time. That's why I'm here.
Okay. Department of Finance.
I'm looking for a hug. No?
Audrey Bezos, Department of Finance. I don't have any specific comments on this initiative. As the committee knows, the administration has proposed expenditures for the Recidivism Reduction Fund that primarily focus on substance abuse treatment for our inmates currently incarcerated and reentry services for prison inmates coming out into the community. So that is the primary focus for our expenditures. I would also just remind the committee that all of the Recidivism Reduction Funds are only available for 1 year, for 14-15, so ongoing expenditures would likely have to be general fund resources.
Okay.
And LAO.
Still looking for that affection.
Drew Soderborg, Legislative Analyst's Office. Our office doesn't have a specific recommendation related to this program, but we will definitely be taking a look at the evaluation that's noted in the agenda, and at that point we could provide you with more input if that's something you're interested in.
Okay. And as far as implementation of this program,
Yes.
When could it start, or have you started, or where are you in the process, or what? How long would it take, or?
Well, fair enough. So there are elements of what we're proposing here that exist to a nominal degree now, but have been the subject of very severe budget cuts in prior years. And so what we're looking to is to create critical mass so the programs can, instead of just sort of hobbling along, be actually muscular programs that test the efficacy of the models we're talking about. For other aspects of this, a couple new things that we are in the process of trying to get off the ground now. Neighborhood courts are in their incipient stages in our office now. The truancy prevention court is another thing that another aspect of this program that we are in the beginning stages of trying to develop. Other programs like the Gang Violence Reduction Program, there is one area of Los Angeles in which is a gang injunction, which we are testing the efficacy of this, but it's again an early stage. So the answer is, we could, I am confident, in the fiscal year, early in the fiscal year to come, have all these programs up and running. In the early part of the new fiscal year, within, say, 3 or 4 months of the beginning of the fiscal year, some of which could be up and running in an earlier moment than that. But by September-ish, ballpark, we could get these programs all in place. I think there is some value in the integrated model, and I am eager to test it. But any pieces of this program the committee wanted to prioritize, we would also obviously be very interested in finding ways to collaborate there too. Because again, I think that one of the beauties of this, the reason I'm here at the state legislative level is we are looking as a state for models that are worthy of replication in multiple jurisdictions. We are in a position where the city attorney's office in Los Angeles can provide that template. And I think we are on the verge of being able to roll it out. There are some resources that we need to get that to happen. I'm hopeful the state can provide those, and they can be the catalyst for change that's system-wide.
Okay. And then I know your counterpart, District Attorney Jackie Lacey, is definitely on the same message that you have. Do you know, as far as the sheriff, the county, are they putting any resources, anything like that? Anything you could partner with them to also make their programs better, make your program better? Have you begun that conversation?
We have had some preliminary conversations. You know, Ms. Lacey has jurisdiction over felonies. We have jurisdiction over misdemeanors. And again, many of our misdemeanors begin as felonies and become misdemeanors. But in any event, we enjoy a very collaborative relationship with the district attorney, both at the top of the charts. Ms. Lacey and I have a very strong relationship personally, and our institutions do too. We have not been at a stage where there is a collaborative approach applied to a particular program at this stage. But we have an interest, for example, Ms. Lacey is very involved in focusing on mental health in the criminal justice system. We have a joint interest in that. There is not a specific mental health component to this. Mental health is subsumed within the programs that relate to people who are homeless and veterans here, but it's not specifically called out as a separate item. Ms. Lacey is addressing it as a separate item. I don't want to speak for her, but I think there's some real value in what she's doing. So short answer is there could be meaningful collaboration that specifically applies to the criminal justice system. We don't have a program that's a joint program yet.
Okay. And there'll be some questions from probably from some of the members here, and they've had a great experience with having cooperation along on the court side, because the school to prison pipeline to be broken, we're all going to have to come together, even collaborative courts, juvenile courts, drug courts, mental health courts, and being able to have the DA involved in this. And so that is part of our dream from the statewide level, that we're all working together seamlessly to choke that the school to prison pipeline off. And so I think I'll let Mr. Stone maybe ask his questions, because he comes from a district that's doing some phenomenal things, as Mr. Rodriguez. So did you have?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi.
Although I find it interesting that you're asking for some love out of DOF and the LAO when you should know better. It wasn't that long ago that you were here, but that's okay.
I never give up.
There you go. See, that's great. That's great. Just some, and understand too, some of the fundamental issues that we, and things that we've been working on here as well, because we're in the days of realignment. That realignment money now goes down locally, and we're not able to touch that, influence that, or really sort of work through that. If we're going to be providing investments at the local level, then we would need to make sure that those investments ultimately pay off for a state interest, because that's what we're looking out for. And I think that's probably some of the concerns with spending state recidivism reduction money on local level. So that's kind of the frame that I'm interested in. So have you gone to, or where's your county with respect to the Prop 30 money or the realignment money and investing in programs like this?
So because the realignment, the dollars that are narrowly allocable to realignment per se are allocable to deal with those who've already been non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual felons, non-sex offending felons, who are going to be housed in local jails and for whom there'll be post-incarceration probation services available. That universe is not within my jurisdiction because, by definition, they are felons. What I'm optimistic we can show through an investment in this program is, A, we can prevent problems from escalating into felonies if we handle them in the, I think, sophisticated ways that these programs contemplate. B, those individuals who are realigned are competing with those whom I prosecute for jail space. There is an inadequate amount of jail space. And as a consequence, local jails for many offenses are no deterrent because people know that they'll have very little time spent in them. Given that reality, a program like this, which is focused on circumventing the traditional court system in most instances, diverting offenders to programs that are likely to preclude them from having to enter that process, can save the state meaningful money and free up dollars that otherwise would be devoted to these kinds of issues. And instead we focus them on the probation services and the court time that's necessary for those offenders. Third thing I'll say is, I fully get the notion that any investment in what we do in Los Angeles has to be tethered to a long-term interest of the state. I wouldn't be here if I didn't understand that. It's a very important point. This is a program which would have a muscular evaluative component. Were we to be the recipient of funds, we would contract with an academic or other researchers to evaluate the efficacy of this with metrics that are hard data-based metrics. That, I think, enables us to then return to the state and say, we've seen how the confluence of these strategies is effective. Here's a study that validates that effectiveness. As a consequence, the state should be investing in similar ways in other jurisdictions or as a system-wide matter in this preventative, restorative justice model.
Right, but But given that, and you're asking the state for some of these funds, the local jurisdictions also would benefit in exactly the same way, because if these programs are successful, that relieves the local jurisdictions of some of their burden, some of their crowding issues as well. And yes, realignment money is focused on the population as you described, but in the bigger interest of LA County and LA City, to provide some of this incentive money would in fact make their obligations for their prison population in general, including those that you prosecute, much less. So it's an investment that at the local level that also would pay off. And so that's kind of why the question is what's the local investment piece of this? You're asking the state for some money here as well.
Yeah.
We would see, and I can see that there would be some state benefit, although I do have some questions on that. And I was glad you talked about the data that you would be able to collect and share, because that would be a critical component of this. But what's the local investment?
Okay. So on the county side, none yet. On the city side, one may not have had an opportunity to review the entirety of our report because there's a lot of material here, but one would...
And I was looking from the county side, especially with their, because of their obligation to their population. That was the piece
Right.
that...
But I do want to mention, though, that any dollars would be leveraged in a meaningful way. So, for example, let's take the school safety component of our program. There's a request for state funding there, but that would leverage existing work in our office that focuses on nuisance abatement, that focuses on an existing anti-truancy program, that focuses on the enforcement of drug and alcohol-related offenses in and around school sites. There are about 7 or 8 different existing programs in my office which would be brought to bear in ways that currently aren't possible in combination with the state dollars. But as for the county issue, again, just to be clear, again, at this point there is no county investment in this program.
Okay. And that was the piece I was looking for. And then it sounds like your structure is different than most other places.
It is.
So how would this translate to other jurisdictions who are wanting to take up similar models?
So while the fact that there is an elected city attorney with criminal and civil jurisdiction is a relatively unique model in the state, but other jurisdictions can and should, I think, employ similar approaches when they prosecute. For example, most jurisdictions have a dual prosecutor for misdemeanors and for felonies, and typically in a district attorney's office. There is nothing to prevent and a lot to commend these programs to those jurisdictions. There's nothing that is inherent in being the city attorney as opposed to being the prosecutorial authority that would preclude any jurisdiction from replicating these approaches. Because misdemeanors are prosecuted everywhere. The question is as to who's doing it. So ideally, each of these elements could be in place in cities large and small throughout California if there were the opportunity to test how integrating them together and infusing some meaningful horsepower behind these, how it works.
Okay. This is, Mr. Chair, I think, from my standpoint, I think something we should take seriously, and especially based on conversations you and I have had. We are locked into not touching the way that counties are addressing realignment, but we do have the opportunity to see investments and encourage innovative ways of addressing the crime problem and reducing recidivism and sort of managing that population there. So I'm not quite sure how that would look here, but as long as it was a program that the state was investing in, especially over a short period of time, so I think we would want to see how you would make sure that you would have it for a long period of time, because I don't see the state really engaged for too much other than as a pilot or as an initial investment and then getting some data back, than being able to show a successful program as best practice for other jurisdictions to entertain. That's a business that I think the state needs to be in order to solve the broader statewide interests that we're looking at.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Rodriguez?
Yeah, just some. Now, these programs have already been initiated in the city before. They just, because of lack of funding, they've
some haven't, some haven't.
Okay.
It's a mixture of programs. In some cases, they have been in place but are only nominally existing now. In some cases, they don't exist at all. In other cases, they exist in a form, and we want to change that form to make it even more effective. So it depends on the element.
On the element. And another question I had is just, since some of these programs haven't been or kind of fallen off the shelf, my concern is they wouldn't be duplicated by somebody else. Or, we have 2 or 3 different organizations doing the same thing. Wouldn't maybe get more benefit out of just one organization doing one program. So there wouldn't be no duplication, so to speak, of...
No, not at all. I mean, I should just give you just a really quick sense. When my predecessor, I've been in my job for about 9 months. When my predecessor took office 4 years ago, just on the prosecutorial side of my office, there were 302 prosecutors. When I took office 9 months ago, 183. So I think the imperative that the state feels in trying to devote scarce dollars to their highest and best use in the criminal justice system is completely replicated by me in Los Angeles. So we're trying to figure out more cost-effective, neighborhood-oriented, and mostly more concretely effective ways to administer justice. Because I have 2/3 the lawyers doing this work that existed just 4 years ago, and crime isn't down by 1/3. So we all feel the same pressures, and I think, therefore, we have the same incentives now. I'm a big believer in there's a moment in time which you either seize or you lose. And this is one of those moments, I think, where there's a real openness led by the committee chair in trying to identify ways to be smarter about how we deal with the justice system. If we lose this moment and devolve into the old ways of doing business, we'll have squandered an opportunity we may never get back. So that's why I decided to come here today. I think that there's a confluence of interest now. There's a real opportunity, and we're bringing to the table not something that's amorphous, but a very concrete. There's a reason why I have this notebook here. It's a very concrete package of specific proposals, including proposed metrics, by the way, which you have before you includes metrics that could be used to evaluate the program. So we're ready. All we need is the catalyst.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you. And I can. Oh. Hello. Do you have any questions? I'm sorry, Ms. Melendez. They didn't give you your
Thank you,
name
Mr.
tag.
Chairman. I know I had to sneak out to go to another committee. So I like what you have to say. I like that there are metrics. I like that there's something tangible and measurable. Those are all wonderful things. However, to me, in the way I understand this looks more like an earmark for Los Angeles. And it's my understanding that with the $81.1 million that the administration said would go toward the recidivism reduction, that was a statewide interest in that everyone could compete. So I'm not compelled to support an earmark when that cuts everyone else out of the process. I think this should be a statewide interest. So perhaps you can explain why you think it would be a better use of funds to funnel it to Los Angeles rather than open it up for competition to the entire state.
Okay. So I'm here today at the invitation of the chair just to explain that we are ready to make some very concrete moves now. I am well familiar with the state budget process, and I would love to have the state decide that because we can test in a muscular way how these programs work, that we're ready to roll. The process by which we get the funds, I'm agnostic about. Whatever process is. What I want to do is put before this committee and ultimately all the key leaders in the state the fact that we have this opportunity right now. Because many times programs evolve that may not be tested, that may not be well thought out in the hurry to respond to a source of funds. I used to run a nonprofit public interest law firm. There's a grant applicant, there's a pool of funds on the table. You have 2 weeks, go. And people try to compete for that. This is the antithesis of that. We have a thoughtful, well-orchestrated program that is ready to go, but we need the resources, not merely for Los Angeles in the narrow sense. Before you were here, we were talking about the benefit to the state of having this kind of allocation to the city. And the benefit is because every prosecutor in the state who grapples with misdemeanors, and which often blossom into felonies, could have the opportunity to replicate these programs. There's nothing about these programs that can't be built upon in any medium-sized to large city, and even small cities could replicate elements of this. Many places don't have the intensity of focus, don't have the desire, are overwhelmed by existing goals, all those things, to think in this way. And I'm offering an opportunity that I hope the state will take advantage of that could benefit everybody in the state. Because I hear you. Just something that's just for LA for a little while. This is not going to be something the state is going to end up supporting. I get that. This has, I think, transcendent value, far beyond that.
Okay. And I like to say, we have the budget subcommittee has the smartest staff than any other subcommittee, and
They told me that before we started.
And between the staff from the budget committee, we should be able to think of something and work through some things. And so I'm going to recommend that we consider funding this program either completely or partially on a trial basis, pending some multi-year data supporting or discrediting this approach. So I'm going to go ahead and have us just kind of looking at a pilot program for this, and looking at my favorite fund, the Recidivism Reduction Fund, which I hope will be increased by the May revise. So with that, because they're telling me I got to get out of here and do a vote real quick. Okay. So, you my vice chair? Ooh, no. Mr. Stone, could you please come over and thank you? Oh, no, we need to have public comment, and Mr. Stone will take over. But thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
It's a great opportunity.
Yes, it is.